The moment someone starts treating your kindness like a monthly payment, they stop seeing you as family. Evelyn Parker realized that on a crowded Friday morning at Denver International Airport. The terminal buzzed with rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and travelers rushing toward their gates. Sunlight spilled through the massive windows overlooking the runways, reflecting off polished floors. Families laughed. Business travelers checked their watches. Vacationers snapped photos before departure. To everyone around her, it looked like the beginning of a perfect trip. Evelyn stood beside her son Ryan and his wife Madison near the check-in counters. At 68 years old, she moved a little slower than she once had, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. She wore a navy cardigan, comfortable walking shoes, and the silver necklace her late husband had given her on their 40th anniversary. The entire vacation had been her idea. More accurately, she had paid for it. The flights, the resort, the excursions. Just like she had done for years. Madison, however, seemed irritated before they had even reached security. She sighed loudly while scrolling through her phone. "Can we hurry up?" she asked. "Some of us actually know how airports work." Evelyn pretended not to notice. Ryan stared at the departure board. He always became strangely interested in anything except conflict whenever Madison was in one of her moods. The airline agent smiled politely and asked for identification. Evelyn reached into her purse. Her wallet caught briefly on the zipper. It took only a second. Madison rolled her eyes dramatically. "Seriously?" she muttered. Then she laughed. Not the kind laugh people share when something is funny. The kind meant to make sure everyone nearby heard it. "I swear, if it wasn't for us, she'd never get anywhere on time." A few people glanced over. The airline agent forced an uncomfortable smile. Madison continued. "Last year, she almost missed boarding because she couldn't find her reading glasses." "Remember that, Ryan?" Ryan gave a weak chuckle. "Yeah, that was all. Just one word. One small F." Yet somehow it hurt more than Madison's comment. Evelyn felt the familiar sting of embarrassment warming her face. Not because strangers had heard it. Because neither of them seemed to realize what they were saying. Or maybe they did. Madison stepped forward and took the boarding documents from Evelyn's hand without asking. "I'll handle these," she said. "It's easier this way." Easier. Such a harmless word. Yet standing there beneath the bright airport lights, Evelyn suddenly felt less like family and more like an inconvenience being managed. Around them, travelers continued moving toward security. Nobody knew that the woman being treated like a burden had paid for every mile of the trip ahead. Nobody knew that something inside her had quietly shifted. For the first time in years, Evelyn stopped wondering how to keep everyone happy. And for the first time, she started paying attention. Evelyn followed Ryan and Madison through security without saying much. The airport noise faded into a distant hum as they made their way toward the gate. Madison walked several steps ahead, already talking about the beachfront resort, the private excursions, and the restaurants she wanted to visit. Every sentence began with what she planned to do. None of them included the person who had made the trip possible. Evelyn settled into a seat near the window overlooking the runway. Beyond the glass, planes moved slowly beneath a bright Colorado sky. She wrapped both hands around a paper cup of coffee and watched workers guide luggage carts across the tarmac. It should have felt exciting. Instead, she found herself thinking about all the vacations that had come before this one. 5 years earlier, Ryan had mentioned that money was tight and that they had not taken a family trip in almost 3 years. Evelyn had quietly covered the entire cost of a week in Florida. The year after that, she paid for a mountain resort in Utah. Then came California, Arizona, South Carolina. Every trip arrived with promises that next time would be different. Next time they would contribute more. Next time they would handle the expenses themselves. Somehow, next time never arrived. At first, she did not mind. She genuinely enjoyed seeing her family happy. After her husband passed away, those vacations became some of the few moments she felt close to Ryan again. But over time, gratitude slowly disappeared. The thank you calls became shorter. The appreciation became assumed rather than expressed. Eventually, nobody even discussed who was paying. The reservations simply appeared. The bills simply landed on her card. Madison dropped into the seat beside her and sighed dramatically. "I hope they upgraded our room this year," she said while scrolling through photos on her phone. "The standard suites are honestly disappointing." Evelyn nodded politely. She remembered spending nearly an hour comparing room options before making the reservation. Madison never knew that. Or perhaps she never cared. Across the waiting area, a young couple sat sharing a sandwich while studying a travel brochure. They looked excited just to be going somewhere together. Watching them stirred something unexpected inside Evelyn. She could not remember the last time anyone in her family seemed grateful simply for the opportunity itself. A boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Travelers began gathering their belongings. Ryan stood and stretched. Madison immediately handed him her designer tote without looking up from her phone. As they prepared to board, Evelyn reached into her purse for her wallet. Her fingers brushed against a small card tucked behind an old family photograph. For several seconds, she stared at it quietly. Then she slid the wallet closed again. A decision was beginning to take shape. Nobody noticed. Nobody asked what she was thinking. And that was exactly why they would never see it coming. The flight lasted a little over 3 hours. Madison spent most of it posting photos, talking about the resort, and making lists of things she planned to buy once they arrived. Ryan watched a movie. Evelyn sat quietly beside the window, watching white clouds drift beneath the wing. Somewhere over New Mexico, she opened her purse again. The small card remained tucked behind the family photograph. It was not an ordinary credit card. Years earlier, when Ryan and Madison were struggling financially, Evelyn had added Madison as an authorized user to one of her accounts. At the time, it seemed practical. Emergencies happened. Flights needed to be booked. Hotel deposits needed to be covered. It was easier than constantly transferring money. Back then, Madison had thanked her repeatedly. Back then, the arrangement felt temporary. The plane landed shortly after noon. Warm ocean air greeted them the moment they stepped outside the airport. Palm trees lined the roads. Bright sunlight reflected off nearby buildings. Madison immediately began talking about dinner reservations and boutique shopping. During the drive to the resort, she barely looked out the window. Instead, she scrolled through reviews of luxury stores located near the beach. "I already found 3 places I want to visit," she announced. "One of them has the cutest handbags." Ryan smiled. "You just got here." "That is the point," Madison replied. "Vacation starts immediately." Evelyn listened from the back seat. Her expression never changed. The resort lobby overlooked the ocean. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed sparkling blue water stretching toward the horizon. Guests moved through the marble entrance carrying designer luggage and oversized sunglasses. Madison seemed delighted. She posed for photos beside a decorative fountain before they had even reached the front desk. As Ryan handled check-in paperwork, Madison handed her phone to Evelyn. "Can you take a few pictures for me?" she asked without looking up. Evelyn took the photos, one after another. Madison barely acknowledged her afterward. It was a small moment. Yet somehow it felt familiar. Throughout the afternoon, similar moments appeared everywhere. Requests. Assumptions. Expectations. Never gratitude. By early evening, Madison announced she wanted to visit a luxury shopping district located about 15 minutes from the resort. "I saw a few things online already," she said excitedly. "I might as well grab them before they sell out." Ryan agreed to go. Evelyn smiled politely and excused herself, claiming she wanted to rest after the flight. Once they disappeared down the hallway, she returned to her room and sat quietly beside the balcony doors. The sound of distant waves drifted through the glass. For several minutes, she stared at the ocean. Then she picked up her phone. The banking application opened instantly. Her account information appeared on the screen. Beneath the list of authorized users was a familiar name. Madison Parker. Evelyn studied it for a moment. No anger. No hesitation. Just clarity. Her finger moved calmly across the screen. A confirmation message appeared. She selected yes. Seconds later, the name disappeared. Outside, the ocean continued rolling toward shore as though nothing had happened. Inside the resort, Madison was still enjoying the first day of vacation, completely unaware that something she had depended on for years no longer existed. The next morning arrived bright and warm. Sunlight poured across the resort courtyard, illuminating rows of palm trees swaying gently in the ocean breeze. Evelyn woke early and enjoyed breakfast alone on a terrace overlooking the water. The sound of waves rolling onto the beach felt calming. For the first time in a long while, she felt no pressure to manage anyone else's expectations. Across the resort, Madison's day started very differently. She had spent nearly an hour getting ready before announcing plans for a shopping trip. By 10 o'clock, she and Ryan were walking through an upscale district filled with designer boutiques, jewelry stores, and luxury storefronts. Madison seemed happier than she had been in weeks. She moved from window to window admiring handbags, sunglasses, and resort clothing. Eventually, she entered one of the boutiques she had researched before the trip. The stores smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood. Soft music played overhead while customers browsed displays beneath elegant lighting. Madison selected several items and carried them confidently to the register. The sales associate smiled and processed the purchase. Then something unexpected happened. The associate glanced at the screen. Her smile faded slightly. She tried again. A second attempt produced the same result. "I am sorry," she said politely. "It appears this card was declined." Madison laughed. "That is impossible." The associate apologized and handed the card back. Madison inserted it again herself. The result did not change. For a moment, she looked annoyed rather than concerned. "The system must be down," she said. Ryan shrugged. Neither seemed particularly worried. They left the store and continued shopping. Half an hour later, Madison stopped at a cafe and ordered iced drinks and pastries. Once again, the card failed. This time she frowned. "That is strange." Ryan suggested contacting the bank later. Madison agreed. Her confidence remained largely intact. Small inconveniences happened. At least, that was what she believed. Back at the resort, Evelyn spent the afternoon reading beside the pool. Families laughed nearby. Children splashed in the water. A gentle breeze carried the scent of sunscreen and salt air. Her phone remained silent. She expected it to stay that way. Meanwhile, Madison experienced a third decline while attempting to reserve a private excursion scheduled for later in the week. The representative apologized and requested another payment method. Madison reluctantly used one of her personal cards. The transaction succeeded immediately. She forced a smile and moved on. Yet something had begun to change. Not the situation itself. Her confidence. For the first time, a small crack appeared in the certainty she carried everywhere. She still believed the problem was temporary. She still believed everything would return to normal. What she did not realize was that normal had already disappeared. The first warning had arrived. She simply had not recognized it yet. The following morning, the tension that had barely existed the day before became impossible to ignore. Madison woke up determined to enjoy herself. If anything, the previous card declines had only irritated her. She convinced herself they were minor technical issues that would sort themselves out eventually. After breakfast, she announced plans for a spa package overlooking the ocean. The resort was known for its luxury treatments, and she had already spent days talking about it before the trip. Ryan agreed to join her for part of the afternoon while Evelyn remained on the terrace with a book and a cup of coffee. The ocean shimmered beneath the morning sun. Seagulls drifted above the shoreline. Everything felt peaceful. Several hours later, Madison arrived at the spa reception desk smiling confidently. The receptionist reviewed her reservation and politely requested payment. Madison handed over the same card. A few seconds passed. The receptionist glanced at the screen and tried again. Then once more. The result never changed. "I am sorry," she said gently. "This payment method is not being approved." Madison felt heat rise into her face. There has to be some mistake. The receptionist apologized again. Guests standing nearby pretended not to listen while clearly listening. Madison quickly pulled out another card and completed the payment. The smile she forced afterward looked noticeably different from the one she had worn earlier. By late afternoon, she attempted to purchase tickets for a sunset catamaran cruise. Another decline. Then dinner arrived. The restaurant overlooked the water, and the view was spectacular. Soft music drifted through the open-air dining area while waves rolled against the shore below. Madison ordered confidently, trying to ignore the growing uneasiness sitting in the back of her mind. When the bill arrived, she used the card again. Declined. The waiter remained professional, but the pause felt painfully long. Ryan finally stepped in and used his own card. As they walked back toward the resort, Madison's frustration exploded. "What is happening?" she demanded. "Nothing makes sense." Ryan looked equally confused. "Did you call the bank?" "Of course I called the bank." "And?" Madison hesitated. "They said the account holder made changes." The words lingered between them. Ryan slowed his pace. For the first time, a possibility entered his mind. Back at the resort, Evelyn sat alone on her balcony, watching the last traces of sunlight disappear beyond the horizon. Her phone remained silent. No messages. No calls. Yet, she could feel something shifting. For years, Madison had treated support like a guarantee. Now, for the first time, she was being forced to face a reality she had never considered. Some privileges only exist because someone chooses to keep giving them. The call came the next morning. Evelyn had just finished a quiet walk along the shoreline. The sand felt cool beneath her shoes, and the ocean stretched endlessly beneath a pale blue sky. She carried a cup of coffee back toward the resort when her phone began to ring. She glanced at the screen. Ryan. For a moment, she simply looked at the name. Then she answered. "Good morning," she said calmly. There was a brief pause on the other end. "Mom, we need to ask you something." Evelyn continued walking. "All right." Ryan hesitated. "Did you make changes to the account?" The question arrived exactly as she expected. Not "how are you?" Not "are you enjoying the trip?" Straight to the account. Straight to the money. "What kind of changes?" she asked. Ryan exhaled heavily. Madison's card stopped working. Evelyn remained silent for several seconds. The sound of waves filled the space between them. "I see," she finally replied. "The bank said the account holder removed access." Ryan lowered his voice. "Mom, did you do that?" Evelyn stopped walking and looked out across the water. Several fishing boats drifted in the distance. The morning felt peaceful. "Yes," she said. Another silence followed. Longer this time. "Why?" Ryan asked. The single word sounded almost confused, as though the possibility had never occurred to him. Evelyn thought about the airport. She thought about years of assumptions. Years of being treated as a resource instead of a person. "I thought you and Madison were independent adults," she said softly. Ryan did not answer immediately. "That is not fair." "Is it not?" Evelyn asked. Her voice never rose. "You are both capable. You both have jobs. You make your own decisions." "Mom, that is not the point." "Then what is the point?" she asked. Ryan struggled to respond. The conversation was moving somewhere he clearly had not expected. Finally he said, "This vacation is different now." Evelyn nodded to herself. "That depends on what made it enjoyable in the first place." Ryan fell silent again. For the first time, he seemed to be considering a question he had never asked himself before. Nearby, resort guests laughed as they headed toward breakfast. A breeze moved through the palm trees. Life continued exactly as it had yesterday. Yet, something important had changed. The illusion that support would always be available had begun to disappear. "Mom," Ryan said carefully, "Madison is really upset." Evelyn looked toward the horizon. "I was upset at the airport too." The line went quiet. Ryan remembered. He remembered exactly what had happened. And for the first time since the trip began, he had no easy response. The atmosphere around Madison changed noticeably after Ryan's conversation with his mother. Until then, she had treated the situation like a temporary inconvenience. Now she understood something much larger was happening. The support she had quietly relied upon for years was no longer guaranteed. That realization followed her everywhere. The next afternoon, several couples staying at the resort gathered for a group excursion along the coast. Madison had spent days looking forward to it. The tour included a private boat, lunch by the water, and plenty of opportunities for photographs. Normally, she would have been the center of every conversation. Instead, she seemed distracted. As the group prepared to leave, the tour coordinator approached with a polite smile. There had been a problem with part of the reservation. Additional payment was required before departure. The amount was not enormous, but it was enough to force another uncomfortable moment. Madison immediately reached for the card she had always used. Then she stopped herself. Her expression tightened. Ryan quietly paid the balance using his own funds. Several people nearby noticed. Nobody said anything, but people rarely need words to recognize tension. Throughout the excursion, Madison seemed unusually quiet. At lunch, one of the women casually mentioned how generous Evelyn had been throughout the trip. "Your mother-in-law seems wonderful," she said. "Not many people would do this for family." Madison forced a smile. "Yes, she is helpful." The answer sounded rehearsed. Across the table, Ryan stared down at his drink. For the first time, he appeared uncomfortable whenever the subject of his mother came up. The afternoon continued, but the mood never recovered. Small moments began exposing truths that had remained hidden for years. Every time a payment appeared, Ryan hesitated. Every time someone complimented Evelyn's generosity, Madison seemed irritated. By sunset, several people had quietly formed their own conclusions. Back at the resort, a group gathered on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The sky glowed orange and gold as the sun disappeared into the horizon. Conversations drifted from travel to family. Someone asked how often they vacationed together. "Almost every year," Madison replied automatically. "That sounds expensive," another guest remarked. Before Madison could answer, Ryan spoke. "My mother usually handled most of it." The words were simple, honest, unavoidable. A brief silence followed. Nobody looked shocked. In fact, several people suddenly seemed to understand much more than before. Madison stared at the ocean. The admiration she usually enjoyed was slowly being replaced by something else. Not judgment. Clarity. For years, she had presented the vacations as part of her lifestyle. Now people were beginning to see who had actually made them possible. And for the first time since arriving at the resort, Madison felt what Evelyn had felt at the airport. The uncomfortable weight of being seen differently than she wanted to be seen. The following evening, the resort hosted a beachfront dinner for guests participating in the week's activities. Lanterns glowed softly along the sand. Waves rolled onto shore beneath a sky filled with stars. Long tables were arranged facing the ocean, and conversations drifted through the warm evening air. Evelyn arrived wearing a simple blue dress and the same silver necklace she always wore. She looked relaxed, peaceful. Several guests greeted her warmly as she took her seat. Madison arrived a few minutes later. The confidence she carried at the beginning of the trip was noticeably gone. She smiled when necessary, but her attention constantly drifted toward Evelyn. Throughout dinner, people shared travel stories, family memories, and plans for future vacations. Eventually, someone mentioned how rare it was to see 3 generations of a family travel together. Another guest smiled at Evelyn. "You must be very proud. It is wonderful that you do so much for your family." Madison lowered her eyes. Ryan stared quietly at the table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Evelyn set down her glass and answered, "I have always been happy to help when I could." Her voice remained calm. There was no anger in it, no accusation, just honesty. "For many years, I paid for family vacations because spending time together mattered to me." Several people nodded. Evelyn continued. "The flights, the hotels, the activities. Most of it came from me." The table grew quiet. Not because the statement was dramatic, because it was unexpected. One couple exchanged surprised glances. Another guest slowly leaned back in his chair. Madison looked as though she wanted to interrupt, but she remained silent. Evelyn was not exposing anyone. She was simply speaking the truth. "I never expected repayment," she said. "I only hoped for appreciation and respect." The sound of the ocean filled the pause that followed. Ryan's expression changed. For the first time, he seemed to be looking backward through years of memories. Birthday trips, holiday vacations, weekend getaways. Things he had gradually stopped noticing because they were always there. Suddenly, he saw them differently. Not as traditions, as gifts. Gifts someone had quietly continued giving long after they stopped being appreciated. Madison folded her hands in her lap. She could feel the shift happening around her. Nobody was judging her openly. In many ways, that made it harder. The facts were speaking for themselves. Evelyn had not raised her voice. She had not embarrassed anyone. She had simply removed the illusion that those experiences existed by magic. Later, as dinner came to an end, several guests stopped to thank Evelyn for sharing her perspective. She smiled politely and wished them a pleasant evening. Across the beach, Ryan watched his mother talking with strangers and realized something painful. The person who had shown the most generosity had been receiving the least respect. And for the first time, he understood why everything had changed. The final morning arrived with clear skies and calm water stretching beyond the resort. Guests checked out, luggage carts rolled across the lobby, and vacation photos were taken beside fountains and palm trees. Everything looked exactly the way a successful trip should look. Yet for Ryan and Madison, something important had changed. During breakfast, the conversation felt different. There were no complaints about reservations, no discussions about shopping, no assumptions about upgrades or future plans. Madison sat quietly stirring her coffee. Ryan looked tired. Across the table, Evelyn enjoyed a simple breakfast while sunlight reflected off the ocean beyond the windows. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Eventually, Ryan spoke. "Mom, I owe you an apology." Evelyn looked up. His voice sounded sincere. Not defensive. Not pressured. Sincere. "For what?" she asked gently. Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment. "For taking things for granted. For not seeing what was happening." The words hung in the air. Madison remained silent. Then, after several seconds, she spoke as well. "I owe you one too." Evelyn studied her carefully. Madison looked uncomfortable, but not angry. Just honest. Perhaps for the first time in a very long while. "I never realized how much you were doing," Madison admitted. "I think I stopped appreciating it." Evelyn nodded. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No raised voices. No speeches. Just the truth finally being spoken out loud. After breakfast, they made their way to the airport. The same sounds filled the terminal. Rolling suitcases. Boarding announcements. Travelers hurrying toward departure gates. A week earlier, that same place had felt very different. Ryan carried several bags without being asked. Madison walked beside Evelyn instead of ahead of her. Small gestures. Simple things. Yet somehow they mattered more than grand apologies ever could. While waiting for boarding, Madison quietly handed Evelyn a cup of coffee. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the coffee. For much more than that." Evelyn smiled. "You're welcome." The flight home was peaceful. Clouds drifted outside the window while passengers slept or read books. Evelyn spent most of the journey looking out across the bright afternoon sky. Her phone remained silent. No urgent calls. No financial questions. No demands. Just peace. As the plane began its descent, she thought about everything that had happened. She had not taken revenge. She had not tried to embarrass anyone. She had simply stopped paying for her own disrespect. Sometimes the most important lesson is not taught through punishment. Sometimes it arrives the moment people are forced to see clearly what they should have appreciated all along. And as the city appeared beneath the clouds, Evelyn felt something she had not felt in years. Not victory. Freedom.